Welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Buino, and I'm so excited to be sharing today's interview with you. Hey, Transforming Trauma listeners, please join us starting in November for our online NARM Basics training to learn how to transform trauma. This online NARM Basics training is available for professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Now more than ever before, it is essential that we learn how to resolve complex trauma and support post-traumatic growth. NARM provides a relational approach to addressing the current COVID pandemic and tools to support healing in the aftermath of this collective trauma. If you're looking for more advanced training in complex trauma and are working in mental health, healthcare, education, substance abuse recovery, or allied fields, join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Welcome to another episode of Transforming Trauma. Today's episode is a conversation between myself and Brad Kammer. If you've been a loyal listener, you know who Brad is already, but if today is your first time listening, Brad is the lead trainer in North America for the NARM Training Institute. We are approaching the Jewish high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And to honor these holidays, we've decided to release 3 episodes that center the experience of intergenerational trauma in the Jewish community. And today, Brad will be sharing some of his own journey and giving a bit of context for these important conversations. Personally, I was really very moved by all of these interviews, so I'm certain that you're going to find them both educational and inspiring. So please enjoy my conversation today with Brad Kammer. Hey, Transforming Trauma listeners. We've got a really special bonus episode we're going to be sharing with you today, and I'm sitting with Brad Kammer right now. Hey, Brad, how are you?
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I'm really excited to be doing this with you as always, and you just do such a great job for our podcast. So I get to be on the receiving end of this today, so that's cool.
Yeah, and this is a topic that's really important and close to your heart. So I want to just give you the floor and let you kind of introduce what we'll be sharing with folks over the next couple episodes.
Yeah, we thought we would do this bonus episode to kind of present this introduction. In September, we will be having a few guests that are going to be talking about intergenerational trauma, specifically through the lens of the Jewish lineage. And I wanted to just kind of talk about it generally and kind of framing what they'll be talking about, but also just talk a little bit about my experience and why this is important for me, like you said.
Yeah. Would you like to start there, talk about your own experience?
Yeah, it's the perfect place to start because, I've been thinking a lot about, like, why did I come into this work in the first place? Thinking back in my life now, it really, a lot of pieces are coming back together in terms of why am I interested in spending my life focusing on trauma and really coming to understand so much of my own upbringing, my own developmental and attachment trauma through the lens of a much larger cultural and intergenerational understanding. As I've become a teacher and a leader in this NARM community, it's a scary territory for me. It's very vulnerable, very sensitive, which I'll talk a little bit more about here. It kind of feels like a coming out in a certain way for me because I can talk very openly about so much around trauma and about emotional processing and all that stuff. But my Jewish lineage has placed me in a situation where I like to talk about, like, Jews have never been safe on more right end of the spectrum politically. They've always been looked at as infiltrators and dangerous and not considered white in America and Europe. And on the left, it's become increasingly unsafe for Jews. And that's where this topic has come up a lot for me over the last years because you know how our trainings go. Most people that are therapists, mental health folks, social workers, teachers, they tend to be more progressive, more left-leaning. And the social justice movement, which I've been part of for a long time, is very close to my heart. And it's been really difficult to see how Jews are being grouped into the dominating culture. I walk into a room, I show up as a teacher, and I'm immediately objectified. And I'm put into a group that is usually considered white male. And not only is that not the group I identify with, but that has been the oppressor for my people for, many, many centuries. And it's been really confusing. It's been painful. and trying to sort this all out for myself is my own work in, I think, really helping me become a better therapist and working with people that are dealing with racial, historical trauma, cultural trauma, and also just trying to make sense of where we are and where we're going in our society. Because these things towards Jews is getting worse, not better right now, at least in America, and I think in Europe as well.
Yeah. And how does it feel to share that with listeners right now?
I'm sharing it with you, so that
Yeah,
feels
right.
yeah, that feels good.
Right, okay.
Yeah, you're very safe, and we have a nice connection. It feels important for me. It feels like it's time for me to be more. I get a lot of feedback when I'm teaching, when I share my own personal process. People really value that, and I've done a great job being very authentic, but hiding a significant piece of my own truth. And this is part of why I wanted to do this, because one of the pride-based strategies that we talk about in NARM, one of the strategies that Jews have used or tried to use, is to hide and assimilate. We're going to get into that more in the podcast episode with Donnie about what Jews have tried to do over the years to act like they fit into the mainstream dominant culture, even though we never have. So me coming out, when I'm afforded a certain kind of privilege, and so when I come out and talk about these issues, it feels scary. And I've always felt the fear from the right. Growing up as a Jew, I mean, that's all we're taught, is that white supremacy and that they want to annihilate us. And that's very normal to me. What's not normal and what really is bothering me, and that's partly why I want to communicate about this, is that the level of threat now coming from the left, where the social justice movement, which again, I'm 100% bought into and have been part of since my teens, that has really, again, objectified Jews and has taken our ability to also talk about the difficulty and the oppression that we face. And it's not just historical, it's also present. And just the last piece that is very important for me is that part of the trauma that Jews have suffered is having our identity taken from us and it being defined outside. And so when someone does that to me, it's just a trigger for me. And I think some days I deal with that trigger better than others, but it's a reason why it feels important for me to talk about that. So much of, as you know, about NARM is about really creating subjects out of objects and creating us into our real authentic self, and putting Jews into a certain category because of what the Israeli government is doing right now, or because of these biases that have gotten passed down for centuries and centuries towards Jews. I mean, Jews killed Jesus and all this stuff. It really puts it in a really difficult situation for me just to show up authentically with myself, even in circles that are strongly advocating for basic human rights.
Right. Yeah. And something that you talk about with Donnie a little bit is the concept of erasure. And now as you talk about it, I almost hear this like orphan quality to this not having a space to really land.
Yeah. And it's confusing. And I wanted to talk a little bit of setting up the conversations you're going to be hearing, but also for myself, just differentiating between the psychological and the political. Because as soon as you start talking about these issues, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are like one and the same. And as soon as you start talking about this, it becomes about the Israeli government and about what the Israeli government's doing. Well, in America, many of our listeners are not supporters of the current administration, the Trump government. And how would we feel if anywhere we go in the world, people are equating the government, which is actually, not the majority of people that support that government.
Right.
And it's another way of really objectifying really what Israel's all about. What Israel's all about is it's really a liberation movement originally. It's that Jews believe that that's their homeland. And if you trace back the DNA, that's what it says. It's not just reading these old scriptures. It's actually that now we have DNA evidence that even before the Arabs kind of took over that area, they were one of the many indigenous cultures that were there, and they were exiled. Jews were exiled. And so returning to Israel is no different than Tibetans who want to return to their homeland. China took over Tibet, or even Native Americans in our country that would like to return to their roots. And those groups are generally supported by social justice groups, but Jews are again abandoned. And not only are they abandoned, but then they're grouped into being the colonizers.
Right.
And that's where the issues become really tricky politically. So Donnie's going to talk a little bit about that. And whenever you get into this conversation, it goes political, but I want to really keep it focused on the psychological, which is basically how do we reclaim who we truly are? How do we reconnect? Like you said about erasure is an annihilation. There are people actively today that want to annihilate me and my family and my people, my children, my grandparents, whatever that is. And how do I reclaim that? How do we reclaim that without it being a strategy of fighting, which is what Jews are doing right now in Israel, or submitting, which didn't go well for Jews.
Right.
You know, got 1/3 of our population wiped out, and when we couldn't fight back. And so we're in a really difficult territory as an oppressed people who have suffered oppression for over 2,000 years now.
And I've been kind of making the decision for myself around this political and personal is that, you know, I think a lot of these political debates that makes it unsafe to talk about, and you have to be polite, right? And you have to not talk about these things, but then we miss this really nuanced, really deep, important conversations. Like when I was listening to your conversation with Donnie, I could feel the intergenerational depth that you were going to, that if we keep it up at this surface level, oh, it's just political, we miss that. And it's so important.
But it's really difficult to differentiate then the right for Jews to exist, number one, and the right to Jews to exist in what is their indigenous homeland.
Right.
And those two things are often very intertwined, and it makes it very difficult then to, again, differentiate the political, which there are real political issues that are happening for Palestinians, for Jews, for Arabs, all around that region, but understanding the intergenerational trauma that's leading to those political issues. Like, why are these people still fighting each other? Why is there a huge amount of people that want to annihilate Jews? Like, why do Jews have to fight and take over land the way they do? Like, where is all this coming from? And I think until we're able to really grapple with the wounds and unresolved trauma on all sides, we're not going to get anywhere.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I was just thinking about my conversation with Lynn as well, and the ignorance, you know, and I'm not judging myself here, but I'm just holding space for how invisible these issues are to a lot of people. And again, just how important. And I as soon as I heard the conversation with Donnie and had the one with Lynn, I thought of a list of people that I'm really excited to send it to share, because I think these conversations are really going to light up a lot of people and help them get in touch with something that's been forgotten.
Exactly. And that's why I love our podcast. It's because it's really about these moments of connection. And I wanted to say this before we air these episodes this month, that this isn't an advocating of any sides.
Right.
Like in NARM, we differentiate between behaviors and states, internal states. And we believe that behaviors are directed or shaped by internal states. And so we're not a behaviorally oriented model, because what we focus on is the internal experience that's shaping the behaviors. I mean, you've heard my analogy, but if you take your car to a mechanic because the check engine light goes off, you really want the mechanic not just to turn off the check engine light, you want the mechanic to see what's driving that symptom of the check engine light to go off. And it's very important for me, because to really understand intergenerational trauma, which then does affect politics and behaviors, violence, and all of those other things, we have to understand the unresolved trauma that we're born in with. I mean, we're just learning epigenetics and how there's been amazing research on second and third generation Holocaust survivors and how children are born with already this DNA that has been disrupted through unresolved trauma. And that's just the beginning of this understanding of that. And it's very important for me to help all of us in our field to bring this in, because it's no different than working with an African-American person that history has been erased.
Right.
And that they were their DNA got shifted because there was rape, and it's the same for the Jewish people. The Jewish people were taken out sometimes as slaves, sometimes in exile. It's called the diaspora, and a lot of them, a high percentage, went to Northern Europe, and the DNA did shift, which made the skin look more white for a lot of what we call Ashkenazi Jews. But that doesn't mean that we have to erase our history, just like someone that's light-skinned, that's an African-American, should not have to have their existence erased in that way too. And so it is a kind of reclaiming personally for myself. I know I was a self-hating Jew is what they call it, because I did not like the Israeli political efforts that they've been doing pretty much since the beginning of Israel. And I still have a lot of problems with that. But as you know, Sarah, that there's underneath the pride base is the shame base. And that's where how we have internalized the oppression and have attacked ourselves. And I spent my life hiding in many different ways, my adult life mostly, and it's come at a cost. And I guess this is part of my wanting to also personally proclaim that I'm ready to kind of address these issues. And I have every right to address them as much as any other community or culture that has dealt with oppression, that really needs to embody themselves so that they can heal this trauma and not continue to pass it down.
Yeah. Just sitting in this with you and having the conversation with Lynn and listening to you with Donnie, I can feel how important this is for you. And I hate using the term like I'm proud of someone because it feels patronizing in some ways, but I am like, I'm proud of you for—
I'll accept it.
For doing this work and also for sharing it. Whenever I've shared something personal, I usually get feedback that it's been really helpful. And I can just only imagine the waves of people that are going to say, oh my gosh, me too. And I didn't even realize it. So thank you for putting this out there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate it. You make it easier for me, of course. I'll give you some of the credit. But also, part of doing this is I'm a completely unfinished product. I am really just scratching the surface of making sense of all this. I'm really confused still. I'm trying to find my place it's like a whole nother level of my own healing and growth that I kind of knew I was going to get to at some point in my life. And, I lived in Israel when I was younger, and I thought about moving there at some point in my life. So I've been flirting with this, like, where do I stand in terms of my Jewish identity? But I feel like now even though I'm confused and I'm unfinished, I do feel like I'm at a place, I have the capacity within myself to not have to use my old strategies as much. And I'm ready and excited for the conversations that I can learn more and I can share more, and hopefully there'll be some healing between different people. And at the very least, I'll hopefully be more able to navigate territory with my clients that are dealing with their own intergenerational trauma.
Absolutely. I'm so excited right now for everybody to hear these conversations. Is there anything else you want to share with folks before we wrap up?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be looking forward to more conversations with you about this and with other people. I want to have multi-conversations with all kinds of different people. There's a lot of different angles to this. And I want to really focus on just how these experiences have lodged inside of us and are creating then the political and conflicts that we're having, and try to get underneath that layer of it so that we can really, what I've watched over the last 3 or 4 months, you and I have talked a lot about this, about the social justice, particularly around racial violence and police brutality, is I just really believe that if we continue to try to throw political policies at these things, that does help. It does help to give certain kind of training to police or to inform people about why bathrooms should be allowed for transgender people. Those things are all really important. And until we really get underneath this, where we hold all this learning and these pains and these fears, those things, it's like we're back again in another civil rights movement right now because we didn't fully heal the underlying pain of our lineage as Americans. And I feel like that's where I really want to go. And I really want to have conversations. You're already having amazing conversations on this podcast, but I want us to continue to have these because that's what I want to contribute.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift that needs to happen again to like, if we could focus on health and mental health and the importance of that, the whole culture could shift. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again for, I feel so blessed to be able to have the conversations that I get to have on this podcast, and to sit here with you in an important moment like this for your journey is it feels really special to me. So thank you.
Well, me too. Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can check out the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Please join us for our online NARM training in learning how to transform trauma. This online NARM basics training is available for professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit at www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We really look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.